Guitars, and this is week 3 of the behind the scenes workshop videos we're doing. I haven't made a whole lot of progress on the two fan fret builds. Coming back from the show, a lot of inquiries to kind of deal with, having a guitar shipped to Germany, and lots of repairs to come up with as well, so call me back a little bit. But there are two topics I'm going to try and cover in this video, seeing as I haven't got a whole lot of show and tell I can really do. So the first is how I figure out the positioning of the fan fret bridge. Obviously, when you come to standard scale lengths and standard regular equal temperament fretwork, there's a lot of millions of guitars have been done before, and so the exact location of the bridge is very common. It's easy to find the information. When it comes to fan fret guitars, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, because depending on the gauge of string you're using, what tuning you're trying to achieve, that can all play on the location of the saddle, location of the bridge. It can change between like 2 to 3 millimeters, so it's a big change. So if you get it in the wrong place to begin with, then it's a lot more work afterwards to try and rectify that, to make sure the guitar plays and intonates properly. So I'll be going over how I find the correct intonation length for each set of strings, so you can kind of do it yourself. So if you've got odd gauges or odd scale lengths or anything like that, you should be able to use that technique to help with your own projects. And the second one comes from a comment on one of the videos from Datsuki, where he's basically asking what were my lessons learned and the process to get the Florentine cutaway done right, so you can get that waterfall edge, like I've shown with, where it's such a clean join that it doesn't need to be bound, and you can kind of see the grain just kind of falling straight over the edge of it, which is a really nice touch. So I'll just go over the little process. So I've got a little test bent piece here to represent the side of the cutaway. So I'll be able to go over that and show you my little process on how to get a nice clean waterfall Florentine cutaway. Okay, so to start with, I've got this little demonstration piece which represents the side. So it's always best to have the soundboard edge completely flat. So that's always a strong reference to begin with. And then secondly, when you're using a bandsaw, like I'm going to be doing, make sure the blade is completely square to the surface of the table. So what I'm first going to do is cut down this line. This is representing where the Florentine cutaway will be, and that's just to separate the two halves. So I have labelled here top, outside, and then labelling where the soundboard face is. And then I've drawn these pencil marks on here to represent grain lines. The marking is a bit hard to see, the grain, so this should kind of help reference us when we're fitting the Florentine cutaway pieces together. So quite easily, to start with, just running it down the middle. So there we go. So now we should have two pieces which have a perfect 90-degree cut on them. So now I have this piece here, and this is the same shape of the profile of my cutaway. So the pit going into the neck will fit across here, and then the piece down into the body will fit here. So these two held together will help me hold these two pieces in position where they're supposed to be, and then I can run the cut into the bandsaw again at 90 degrees. I'll cut into this block, but it's not important, it's sacrificial, so there's no big issue. And then as long as I hold all these pieces flat to the table, tight into this block, and then cut nice and slowly with a sharpish bandsaw blade, that should be a really good starting point for these cuts. And in some conditions that could be good enough for the joint, but we'll check that in a minute. So I'm just overlapping them tightly together, like so. Now you probably take a couple of cuts, so the first cut will just knock off the inside corner, and then you move them in a little bit closer, do a second cut, and then that should make the entire face cut and ready for the join. That's the first cut done, and now I'm just going to butt them close together. So now they're touching all the way down. Just very gently. Yes. You could probably do one more. There's still some kind of end grain from the original cut at 90 degrees. So I'll just butt them again close together and then do one last cut. Make sure you go nice and slowly. Keep everything flat to the table. So let the tool do the work. And then I can see that I've got a cut clean across the entire face on both pieces. So now we can move on to the next bit and test the fit and see if it all works out well and if we need to do any sort of corrections. So here we have the two work pieces, and as you can see, we've dusted off there. They can line up, and then you've got your point of reference there. So it's looking quite clean, but we'll just touch it up a little bit just so I can show you how I'd go about doing it. So what you need to do is have the piece supported on a high block and make sure that there's enough support across the whole length of the side. If you were to try and plane freehand, as it kind of holding it as it is, you'll compress the two outer edges as you apply pressure with the tool, and then you'll end up having a bowed piece that won't be 90 degrees anymore. And then you'll end up with gaps and a lot more difficulties later on. It's always best to apply as much support to the area so there's no flex when you're using the tool. So I've just got a neck blank here as my method of holding it steady. Obviously the longer the side, the more tricky it will be. So you can either clamp it off the edge of the table and then hold it like this, or you can just have a piece that's much taller off the table. This piece isn't too long, so we should be okay. So what I'm going to do is set your blade very fine. Now you don't need to worry too much about the ends blowing out as you're planing, because they'll all be lost in the binding channel once you have the guitar together. So make sure you set your blade fine. So like I said, hold it pretty rigidly against the flat of your wood piece so there's no flex into it, and then find the level you want it to be at. Overhang just a little bit. There we go. And then you can just take probably one or two swipes just to clean it off. Make sure to hold the tool consistently as you're going. And then once you see you've removed all the saw blade marks, let's have a look. Once you've cleaned off all the saw marks from the end, that's when you know you've got a clean surface. So I'll just do the same with the other piece, and then I'll show you how we put them together. So as you can see here, I have, because I wasn't supporting the back end of it, where we focus, there we go, I've blown out a little bit at the end here, so if I push them back together, these bits will be slightly higher than the rest of the surface. Like I said, because we are going to be removing this whole depth using binding, all I'd recommend you do is just get a little blade and just press it in tight and just clean off that high end. It's not going to be necessary. So even if there is a little gap there, it won't affect the main piece that you do see once the ribs together. So now once we're happy with that, just hold it together, do a little test fit. Make sure there's nothing glaringly obvious. I think we're looking okay. Now the paler the wood, the harder this will be able to achieve, because if you're trying to do maple, for example, you're doing a maple on maple join, any gaps you'll be able to see a clean glue line down the center of it. So if you want to start by doing these on a darker material, so Indian rosewood, wenge, even walnut, that will be a lot more forgiving for your first time. And if you feel a bit more confident, a bit more brave than the mahoganies or the maples or myrtles. Will be your next best bet. So just want to get a bit of painter's tape. Tape you have to hand. And now we want to hold these two pieces together. Make sure the lines of the grain are lined up, or in this case these pencil marks I've made. And hold it so the very tips are touching, and that the soundboard edge runs continuously along the length of the side. So I'm just putting the tape around the pencil marks first so I can still keep an eye on them. And then make sure it's butted in tight. It's a little tricky because you've got such fine edges on both sides. As long as you get it as close as you can be. So there's the two pieces there. So now that tape can hold the two pieces together, and then you'll see you can get a nice fine connection there. So make sure if you have any pieces that have popped out, like the end of this piece here, like I showed you, that that's not causing any deflection in the alternate piece, the other side. So once we're happy with that, we will get our block that we used on the table saw and use that as a kind of support. And then we can run some glue down the seam. Once the pieces are open, fold it over and then kind of tie it or clamp it into place with some tape, I guess. So that's glue. So open the piece up. I actually just put a few extra pieces of tape here just to hold the edges tight. There we go. And then the thin bead down. Make sure you've got a good covering. And as you fold it over, you'll see all that glue squeeze out because it was a nice tight join. Wipe away any excess that you can. Don't forget your internal block will be fitting in here, so if you have big blobs of hard glue, it's quite easy to, quite tricky to clean out the area after it's dry, but it's easy enough to clean. Now when you can just wipe your finger through it. And then if you do have any glue build up on the inside and you can't get it with a chisel, you can just shave off the inside point of your supporting block, and that means you can still get a tight fit without that interrupting you. So then we'll get our little internal block here. I think I can get one clamp this way and then one clamp this way. Yep. Obviously it's a little easier seeing as it's such a small piece. It will be a little bit trickier once it's a full set of sides. So just make sure you do a dry run, make sure you've got everything you need in the right place. There we have it. Yeah. So got quite a snug fit against the inside of this block on both sides. And then once this is dried, that will be the time to then install your internal block. So what you've got to do is be dead careful because this isn't the strongest joint, it's two end grain pieces stuck together. So once this is dried off properly, an hour, 2 hours maybe, remove the internal block, which shouldn't really be glued, there's not too much surface there, and then get in your longer internal support block and glue that in, and carefully try and make sure you don't break that seam back open. So it's been about an hour or so, ready to come out. I've just run some super glue onto this block just to hold it all together, but if you were to do it yourself, you wouldn't need to do that. You just kind of install your new support block in beside it. But I just wanted to get it out and see how it all holds up. So as we peel the tape away, so what we should be looking for is this whole face where the soundboard will be still flat, and then we don't want any wet glue, don't want anything too obvious as far as glue lines go. Hopefully that is in focus for you. So as you can see, we've got the pencil lines tying over neatly from one side to another. So in real life those will be your grain lines, so you get a nice clean run over the edge there. Now when you're sanding this area, you don't want to sand obviously flat, which way am I facing, flat onto the tip. You're going to knock away all your hard work. So you really only want to touch the faces very lightly. Don't forget, it may look clean right at the face, but then the further down you sand, it could open up a join if the gap right behind isn't tight enough. So you really want to touch this face with the minimal effort. Also because if you sand in this direction, you could catch the fibers pointing from this piece, and vice versa. If you were to sand in this direction on this piece, you'll catch the end fibers of this. So sand into the point, and then you shouldn't run into any issues of getting grain breakout. So we'll just use a block if I can find one. And whenever you're sanding one surface, you want to kind of equally sand it the other side, and that way you'll keep the center of that join right on the tip. So if you were sanding this side too much, it will then appear along this face, and you don't quite want that. So you want to keep it balanced whenever you are cleaning up, but just try and clean up as little as possible, especially when you're finished sanding. Just be as careful as you can be. So we'll hit this with a bit of spray. So that's what it's looking like at the minute. And then so it's not too shabby. And like I said, the darker the wood, the easier it is to get a good job of this. So I hope that's helped, and you don't feel too scared about approaching something like this yourself. And then again, if it always goes wrong, you can add a piece of binding down the center of it here, just to hide anything that does come through. Okay, what we have here, an extremely simple setup on how to find the intonation of either unusually long strings with scale lengths, or strings that are thicker or thinner than what are kind of common. Because if you were to try and intonate an extra thick string and an extra low note, it's harder to use the kind of calculation, say on the Mac fret calculator and so on. It won't quite marry up quite right. So if you're a few millimeters one way or another, you're going to really notice the difference, and it's going to cause you a lot of bother. So it's quite simple. All I've got is a wooden peg, and that fits into my bench dowel holes, and it's got a hole in for the strings. Pop that in there. And then this here is a plank of wood with the tuner screwed into the end. So the idea is that you'll feed the string through the peg, and then tighten it up with the tuning peg, and then we'll change bridge and nut replica, just a piece of wood, we can shove under there, and find out where the 12th fret is by our measurements, by our fret calculator measurements, and then we can figure out at what point of the bridge will make the perfect note. So because we can get our little clip-on tuner and clip it on to the end of our plank with the tuning peg on, we should be able to intonate it quite accurately as well. So I'll just get this set up and I'll show you how it all goes. There, so the low A is 28 inches, which is 711.2 millimeters, which means that the 12th fret is at 355.6 millimeters. And then the high A, which is 27-inch scale length, 685.8 millimeters, and then the 12th fret will be at 342.9 millimeters. Okay, so here's the setup. It's a bit rough and ready, but it's a good idea of getting a representation of the string length. So I have a block in the dowel hole of the bench with a hole through for the string to feed through. I then have a fake nut, which is a couple blocks with a drill bit. So that's my 0 point, that's where I measure from. I have a line here which represents the 12th fret, and I'm using this drill bit to kind of size up and pretend that the action is measured correctly. So you can change the drill bit size depending on what action you think you need. Again, that plays into the intonation location, so it's kind of good to get that pretty accurate as well. And then we've got our block, which has a machine head screwed into it. This is held into the end vise, and then it's got the digital tuner there as well, the clip-on tuner, so we can get the note correct. Hopefully you can see that there. So first off, we roughly position the saddle, which is this little block with a drill bit on top again, and so we'll get the note to pitch. Have a look, a little bit higher. There we go, that's just about right. And then we'll fret the string by pressing it down to make contact with this drill bit, which is our 12th position. Let's check it's in the right place. So that note's reading a little flat, not major. So that means we need to pull it towards the nut. If it's sharp, the string needs to get longer and you move the saddle back. And if it's flat, you pull the saddle forward towards the nut. So we'll just scooch it forward just a little bit, a few millimeters. Then we need to retune lightly. So now. So still a little flat. Now when you're pressing down here, you only want it to slightly make contact with that drill bit. You don't want it to be compressed on this side, because again that will torque the tension up and then that'll throw your number off. So we want to get it as accurately as we can. That's sitting quite well. We have it sitting pretty steady. So now this should be the scale length, or the string needed for the scale length of 28 inches. So I'll just double check these results and then I'll repeat it with the highest string, and then once I know the lowest string and the highest string, it will help me both get the correct angle of the saddle piece. I need to redesign the bridge, I think I get mine too shallow, and then once that's redesigned I'll know exactly where it sits on the guitar. Well, I hope that was helpful. I hope you now feel a bit more confident if you're trying to tackle this sort of Waterfall Florentine. It's quite easy as long as you take your time and you're careful and you make sure that you keep your edges very square and flat when you're working on them, so they don't distort. And again, I hope you feel more comfortable with trying to find the location of fan fret bridges and string lengths. So a good tip to do as well is, once you've got it all set up and you found the intonation and the scale length you want to use, reset it, jiggle it about a bit, and then try and get the same result. If you then get a different result, do a third test, but if you get the same result twice, then you should be quite confident that you've actually got the right number. So for the low A at 28 inches, which is 711.2 millimeters, the string length actually needs to be 718, so that's plus 7 nearly millimeters longer. And then for the higher A at 27 inch, or 685.8 millimeters, the string length actually needs to be 692.5, so that's an additional 7 millimeters for the higher string length. So as far as I can go for my measurements I've used for these plans, I think my bridges will need to be redesigned. I don't think the angle is quite steep enough, so I will need to tweak it, make it a little bit steeper, and I think I'll also, just for belts and braces, make it a much wider saddle, like a 6mm white saddle, just so I can really fine tune the intonation for each of these guitars. But I'd rather make a new bridge, spend an hour or two making a new bridge, than stick with my plans, find out it's wrong once it's glued on, once I'm trying to string it up and it can never be intonated, and I have to really do some sort of woodworking magic to make it work. So it's always good to double check things, especially when they're strange and unusual, like these guitars will be. But now, once I have them done once, I can log the results, and then it'll be plain sailing from there. So it's always worth putting the effort in the first time round. I hope you found those little tibby bits useful. I keep saying these should have strings on the next video. I've said that for 2 videos now. Maybe they'll have strings on the next time. I can't guarantee, but who knows. So yes, if you have any comments or queries, pop them in the comments below. Any build questions or things you're stuck on, I can help you with, so I can use it in a future video. So one of the other comments was regarding soundboard voicing. So next time I do a soundboard, I'll take some time and kind of show you what sort of direction I try and look in order to get a good soundboard stiffness, weight ratio, and all of that based on the materials it's made out of. That should be for a future video when I'm next making a soundboard. Well, great. Like and subscribe, all that crap, and I'll see you next week.